Okay, let's look at Road to the White House. And I have to talk about this in a couple of different ways. Because, honestly, what you saw in the playthrough is not what I usually play this as. Well, so I heavily modified the game in the playthrough, and that's the first step. I've never modified this game to this degree. And that created the impression, if you're watching the playthrough, of, a game that I've thrown them all out, but that just requires way too much paperwork, especially solo. And that's true. The base game is not so bad. The primaries and caucuses, in and of themselves, when you're playing it, are kind of tricky because you're constantly looking up, okay, which states are coming into play now, and you have to worry and plan all that out to a degree that is kind of an annoyance for the pleasure aspect of a normal board game, right? Maybe if you were totally addicted to this game and very used to the pace that it gave for the primaries and caucuses, it wouldn't feel like so much work. But when you start playing with the advanced game rules, the game does get to be a lot of work. That said, I've had a hell of a lot of fun with this game in the basic version. So in terms of a gameplay situation, the basic version of the game is kind of fun. You roll your dice, you move around, you hit the cities, you score your points, they're kind of secret. You buy advertising, and at the end you do a rundown and see who's got what. Polling makes that a little less secretive because people can, get a certain advantage off of that. Off of getting, the knowledge of where everything actually lays in the states they're interested in, and then they can kind of aim to improve their position. And that all plays actually pretty well. It's a little heavier in gameplay than the old GDW campaign trail, if it is indeed GDW. I didn't look it up, I'm sorry. But a very similar style of game. You roll your dice, you move, you score for the cities. The extra intricacies of the issues add to the gameplay value. But what I was doing here was an attempt to make this a heavier simulation. Because one of the things this game does is it very much tries to capture some more of the nomination process than most of the games out there that handle that. And it does that through associating specific issues with the characters, with the primary and caucus system in the advanced rules. And frankly, every step that it takes in that direction, I feel actually makes the game less accurate as a simulation. And the advanced game, like I said, is a little tedious and a little bit too much effort. But when you're playing with the basic game, with preset characters, if I can find them, they're in here somewhere, with the preset characters that you have all the vote contents for them listed, all the special effects that are going to affect them. Now, these are still, you can still look at this and say, well, that's kind of a nightmare. Not all the characters are so bad, but yes, most of them do have about a page of, here's another bad one, but here's one that's not too bad. He's got like 3 issues. Well, no, he's got 3 conditions. Make it 6 conditions, but he's got 2 interesting issues and a bunch of anytime votes because he's like, well, he's Senator Redneck. You can guess what that'll mean. Strong anti-ethnic positions of the different types. So, I can remember having a lot of fun playing this, opposed, and especially the base game of it. But the fact that it tries to advance, tries to capture that simulation aspect of the situation, and that it tries, especially in the advanced game, to simulate more and more, led me to the, okay, well, what things can I just fix, right? And that's what led to this bloated circumstance. And what I found is, at the core, there are certain things in this game that can't be fixed. And one of the key ones is that each of the issues that's present doesn't work the way you would think those issues would work. So much of what has attracted me to this game was the desire to make it into a better simulation. But that's basically something that I feel like, at least at this point, I'm going to throw that idea out. Because if I wanted to build a better simulation based on something kind of like this model, it would really be a pure spreadsheet game. No roll and move, no bopping around on the board. So to me, it's kind of a complete failure in that degree. It's one of these audacious failures, though, kind of like Le Grand Guerre with its things that just do not work, Europa Universalis, La Révolution Française, all the AWE games, and a number of other simulations that I've seen out there that just don't quite do it. Well, this one just doesn't do it, and I see no way forward with this one, no way of fixing it without basically redesigning the game. But as a gameplay in that basic game, I think it actually plays pretty well, and that's something you're not going to see in my playthrough. But let's talk a little bit about components, because components are an issue with this game. And the very first of these, and probably the worst, is the board. And why is the board an issue? Not because it's a hard board, but because there's so many locations that are so close to each other, and then the player pawns end up, over more than one location in tight areas. And there's certainly not room for multiple players to be in a single place in general, which is something that happens quite often in the game. So that's problematic right there. The actual player piece is obviously a little too large. The cards are good quality. Some people might find, you've got this, each player has one of these paperwork things normally. You didn't see me playing with one of these, where they keep track of all the votes that they've got and whatever organization they have, etc. There's a lot of paperwork involved in it. That's just part of the gameplay of it. Even in the base game, there's a lot of paperwork, more than maybe a lot of people would like to play. I have no problem with it, and most of the groups that I was with had no problem with that. Where things got a little bit less easy, the rules are fine. And I mean, that's about it, really. These cards, all good stock, good quality. Mayfair did a good job of putting out games largely. There was just maybe no good solution, but the pieces are too big for the board. And that can be really problematic. You might be better off with little bingo chips or something like that on the board, just because they're see-through, and I don't know. Or the Rail Baron, Crayon Rails pieces. The core game isn't too bad. There's a few things that feel kind of goofy, like you have to visit a state 5 times in order to get a basic organization in it, unless you're going to just buy it, which means it never happens except in like New Jersey. Because New Jersey, you can visit, going to New York and Pennsylvania, and you can visit it 5 times, just putting a point in each time. Then you get your organization, then you can start channeling stuff throughout. The role of organizations and money is huge. You can basically, if you have characters who can generate a lot of money and the issues come up for you in good order, you can end up in a very good position where you just can basically buy the election. Most of the wrap-up is probably a better place, and certainly the playthrough is, for looking at where I'm really hitting on why this is such a complete failure as a simulation. And it is in a lot of ways. Even in the era that it was written, and then trying to extend it to other eras doesn't work very well at all. For the nominating process, I can think of 2 other games that are out there. Landslide, which is basically a family-style game. Rolling, you're getting cards. They kind of work, but you're not a character in the same way as you are in this. You don't have an associated issue, etc. And then likewise, with not having a character in it, Avalon Hill's Candidate. Avalon Hill's Candidate, I actually feel, is the better game as a simulation. I'm not sure about Landslide. Landslide, it's like Monopoly, basically. It's a cool game, actually. Even for those of you who don't like Monopoly, you might like Landslide. I think I covered it. But it's not, it's not really trying to correspond to anything in the system. Candidate does a good job as a simulation, even though it abstracts away certain things like, it doesn't fix the dates to the primaries and caucuses, etc. But it gets some ideas and concepts in play. It still doesn't really do as a very accurate portrayal of how most races actually turn out, where there's usually just a couple of people, maybe at best, who have any chance in it. And, again, it's a 6-player game with, everybody kind of having an equal split of the vote at the end, or a portion, which I don't think is an accurate representation. But if all candidates were equal, I think that Candidate does a better job of it. In this, all candidates aren't equal, but they essentially are, just because they can score so many points by moving around on the map. So again, you're not going to get a real feel for the nominating process at all from this game, no matter what you do. There was something else I wanted to talk. The role of luck in this game is pretty big, though. So in a game like Candidate, the role of luck isn't that big. I think there's cards that you have that have values, but it's kind of like Mr. President. You have a handful of cards, and you can decide how to allocate those. And eventually your luck should even out. In this game, key events can come up and demolish you in a state that's vital to you. Certain cards can come up that give you tons of money. You do have some control over aspects, which is to say the issues. You have some power to bring up issues and not. But the only way you really can claim that power is by having the highest charisma. Players who do not have high charisma are not going to be able to bring up issues very easily. And that's kind of a problem. Even in a 2-player game, then there's only one issue on the table at a time, I believe, which means that the guy with the higher initiative can say, okay, well, this is the issue that I'm putting up right at the beginning of the game. He has to pay $1 for it, but okay. And he's just using those issues at the very least to prevent the other player from getting their issues up. If you have middling charisma in a big multiplayer game of this, you might be able to get an issue up on the first turn of the game. But from then on, it becomes harder and harder because each player only gets to bring one up at the beginning of the game, well, at the beginning of each turn. But the guy with the highest charisma always has the first choice. And, as long as he has money available, he does not want you getting your power issue up if you have one. So if you configure a character that has a very strong issue that they're related to, you better make sure you have the charisma to make certain that issue gets some airtime. And that's one factor of it. But there's just nothing you can do in particular. Like, if you create a character, you could create a more balanced character. But if you create a very one-sided character who's very big on, like, pro-oil, like Ted Cruz was in this game, which he won, then there are cards that could just randomly come up and basically give you a huge jump in the game. And there are other cards, like an oil spill, that can come up and that can wreck you. And, you have some ability to choose, okay, well, what do you want to go for? But the thing is, if you've got it's kind of like the 1830 conundrum at conventions. If you go for a low-risk option, you're probably not going to win because somebody's going to go for a high-risk option and they're going to get lucky on it. The 1830 conundrum is a little different, which is that all the people who are who are counting on an early bankruptcy and are just running for as much money as possible and incrementing the chance of their early bankruptcy. But that's totally irrelevant to this. But, we like to go off on tangents. And it's not like many people are watching this one. it's a non-war game, and since I'm not posting them up on BGG, nobody cares. It's it's an older game without much. I have had so much fun with this Opposed, but it doesn't play terribly well solitaire. There's a lot of reasons it doesn't work well solitaire. One of them is, all the record keeping is just obnoxious when you're playing solitaire. It's painful enough, I think, for most people when you're playing Opposed, but man, when you're doing 6 of them and you're having to constantly be updating records, that's a pain in the butt. But another is that there's hidden information in play. And then there's kind of the clumsiness. You kind of have to try to figure out what you're doing in your turn based on your limited information. So there's actually a lot of calculating and thinking between turns that can go on that just all gets offloaded on me, constantly when I'm playing it solo. Either that or I could do as I kind of did at the end and say, okay, I'm going with this. Without the primaries and caucuses, a lot of that headachy calculation goes away. You come up with a general strategy. Okay, let me look. I need New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. Connecticut doesn't look like it's easy to get in and out of. Let's screw that. Rhode Island doesn't look too bad, even though it's not worth. And you start counting your set of states that you're going to be geographically aligned in, and you come up with an amount that'll get you into the show, that'll get you past the first round. You score big in those, and then you try to figure out what to do with your advertising to see if you can get, when people get culled from the game later on. That's one way of doing things. Another is to just visit the small states. You figure out your kind of strategy for how you're going to run, and it's based kind of on the issues that you're associated with and everything. And you run a much more regional campaign under those conditions because you want to make sure you have a score that nobody else is going to beat in some states, or that you come in second in a place where somebody's going to drop off. And there's a lot of interesting thought and play and decision in that. It just isn't the simulation that I hope for it. But it's a cool game to play. And I guess that's basically where I go with it. I give it the rating that I do, which isn't very good because it fails so much as a simulation, and because the last few times I've played it, it's been solo, and I really haven't enjoyed it much. And maybe because even Opposed, I've been playing with the primaries and caucuses because of their simulation value, when really I don't think they add that much to the game. So yeah, I would recommend going with the basic game of it and not having any expectations that it's going to give you a good picture of anything having to do with the nomination process. It's just so far off in so many ways. Up it goes.